to have. You know, when you're late in the game, dropping the gloves and taking the extra penalty might not be the best thing to do. And that's the situation we're in.
Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm Karina Roman in Ottawa, where Prime Minister Mark Carney is rolling back many of Canada's retaliatory tariffs on the U.S., arguing it's time to stick handle with the U.S. after dropping the gloves early in President Donald Trump's trade war. The White House is welcoming the move, calling it long overdue.
He's removing his retaliatory tariffs, which I thought was nice. We want to be very good to Canada. I like Carney a lot. I think he's a good person. And we had a very good talk yesterday, so I think it'll be good.
On this side of the border, reaction so far is mixed. Businesses are applauding the move, saying the counter-tariffs were almost as damaging as the U.S. tariffs themselves, while others say Carney is rolling over.
He promised he would have elbows up. He promised he could, quote, handle Trump. Today we learn that it has been yet another capitulation and climb down by Mark Carney. His elbows have mysteriously gone missing.
Canada's counter-tariffs on steel, aluminum and autos will remain in place, but as of September 1st, tariffs on all the U.S. goods that are CUSMA-compliant will be removed. We've got all angles of this story covered, including reaction from provinces, industry and our party insiders. We begin, though, with the government's case for why it's doing this. Here with me now is Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Karina.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Canada has essentially taken a key component that it saw originally as leverage against the U.S. today, taking it off the table. So what cards does Canada have left in these negotiations?
Canada has a lot of cards, Karina, to use your analogy, in our conversations with the Americans. We're their most important customer in critical industries. We have opportunities where we can invest in projects as Canadians and Americans that will be critical to economic growth in both countries. So we have a lot of resources and a lot of trading opportunities that the Americans are very interested in. As you said in your opening, these counter tariffs were put in February. The Americans subsequently exempted CUSMA-compliant goods. It wasn't on the very first day they announced their tariffs. A couple of days later, I remember a conversation I had with Secretary Lutnick. He told me that they would be announcing that CUSMA-compliant imports into the United States would be exempted from these tariffs. Canada hadn't taken that step, and the United States a few weeks ago, for the first time, publicly in an official presidential executive order, committed to respecting the CUSMA-compliant exemption, which puts Canada, as the Prime Minister said, in the best position of any other country right now in terms of a trading relationship with the United States. It's not where we want to be. It's not where we were 8 months ago, but we still have a significant marginal advantage, and maintaining tariffs that were not respecting the CUSMA exemption that the Americans had put in place some months ago, in our view, was unwise.
Why not increase the sectoral tariffs, though? If, as the Prime Minister said, this is about matching, about being on the same playing field, but we don't have the same level of tariffs on their steel and aluminum and autos as they do have on yours. What was the thinking behind not going forward with that?
The situation with respect to autos is quite similar. It mirrors largely our
okay, but steel and aluminum
tariffs.
Does not.
Right. And look, the Prime Minister, I think I saw in the news conference, answered the question that because we believe there is an opportunity in the coming weeks to come to a bilateral deal with the United States that will put us in a better position than we're in this evening with respect to those sectors that they've targeted with these sectoral tariffs. The challenge is, Karina, whether it's steel, aluminum, automobiles, or softwood lumber is adjacent to this conversation, but critical for the Canadian economy. These are areas where we're the most integrated of any other country with the United States in the supply chains. And they have, in the trading agreements they've reached with other countries, not provided relief on these sectoral tariffs. So it is a significant challenge for us. But while the Prime Minister, following his conversation with the President and my conversations with Secretary Lutnick, while there is an opportunity, in our view, to work towards a bilateral agreement, we're going to continue to pursue that. And if we get to a different conclusion, the Prime Minister will make the decisions that would be appropriate then.
Now, obviously, critics, even people who are not always critics of the Liberal governments, so, you know, whether we're talking about Unifor's Lana Payne or others, seeing this more as appeasement, elbows down, that this is just giving in. What do you say to those critics who also say that every time we appease Donald Trump and the U.S. administration, as we did with the DST, the digital services tax, that we're just showing that we're willing to go more and more? And especially, how do you know, if someone's insatiable in terms of what the appeasements they're looking for, when do you draw the line?
Well, these are always the judgment calls, Karina, that the government and obviously in this case the Prime Minister make. But it's not sort of, you have to be careful not to take one slice of time and come to a very rigid conclusion. We are in the best position of any country right now in terms of the overall tariff rate applied to our exports to the United States. The American government committed to that in an executive order. Very, very important to the economic security of our country that CUSMA be respected. The Americans will trigger in the coming weeks, we believe, their domestic process around consultation to get ready for the CUSMA review, which will start in 2026, built into the agreement. We're doing the same thing. And we think it's responsible to get to that conversation around a review of CUSMA, something that I'm in Mexico City next week talking to the Secretary of the Economy, Secretary Ebrard, precisely around how we can work together in the CUSMA review process. So we have to get to that conversation in the most coherent posture possible. And the Prime Minister's decision today very much lines up in that way.
Is today's move really more about CUSMA than working towards a bilateral agreement in the interim? I mean, how much in jeopardy is the government worried CUSMA is in?
But they can both be true at the same time, Karina. Our hope is that we can come to a bilateral arrangement which takes some pressure off the sectoral tariffs, but recognizing that, as I said a second ago, other countries in their trading agreements with the U.S. haven't been successful in the sectoral tariffs. We think that because of the integration, because of their dependency on things like aluminum, because of the integration of the supply chains in automobiles, like we talk to these business leaders and these workers' representatives, the union leaders as well, we are in a different case with respect to other countries in this area. Let's see if we're able to get a bilateral arrangement. But this, so if we are, great. If it's in the interest of the Canadian economy, the Prime Minister will make that decision. If it's not the right deal for Canada, he won't. But along the road, we're also preparing at the same time and in consequence thereof for the CUSMA review conversation. We're going to be consulting Canadian industry. I was on a call with a number of leaders in the steel, aluminum, and automobile sector with Ambassador Hillman today. But we're only going to intensify that work as we get ready for that discussion. It's critical to the Canadian economy that we engage in that conversation in the most prepared and thoughtful way, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Now, I know I only have you for 30 seconds more because I know you have other commitments, so I will ask this question really quickly.
So do you. You got other people on your show too, Karina.
First guest is always a priority. Did the Prime Minister give Canadians a false sense of expectations during the election? Has this turned out to be a lot harder than anyone expected?
I don't think so. The Prime Minister was elected on a mandate to navigate the country's economy through the turbulence that President Trump has imposed on the global trading system. The decisions that the president took in March and in February are different than the ones he took in July in terms of other trading agreements he signed. So the American government has evolved their posture particularly on sectoral tariffs, and has made very little exception, has in fact made no exception for any of their trading partners around the world. So that wasn't the picture that they were presenting to the world in February or March. The situation evolves. The great thing for us is Prime Minister Carney remains unequivocally the best leader with the most experience and the most insight in how Canada can both grow our own economy by building big projects again. That was the other part of our election campaign, but navigating through this turbulence with the Americans in a way that protects Canadian workers and Canadian industry. I'm enormously confident as we look out over the next few weeks and few months in the CUSMA review, and grateful that Mr. Carney has his hand on the tiller.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc.
Have a great weekend. Thanks.
Still to come, our party insiders with a special guest will join us to discuss the political implications of today's announcement for the Prime Minister. But first, reaction from Canada's automobile industry. Are they happy with today's move? That's next. Prime Minister Mark Carney made moves to calm the trade waters between Canada and the United States today.
We're matching what the United States has done, what the President has done. We have the best deal of any country with the United States right now.
While all retaliatory tariffs on CUSMA-compliant U.S. goods are being removed, Canada will keep its tariffs on steel, aluminum and automobiles as the government works with the U.S. to come to a new deal. Joining us now from Washington is CBC's Ashley Burke. Ashley, what was Trump's reaction to all of this today?
Well, Karina, after Canada's Prime Minister backed down on some retaliatory tariffs to keep talks going with Donald Trump, the U.S. president described it as a nice move. Now, Trump was asked what his reaction was by a reporter in the Oval Office, and this is what he said.
I'm fighting for the United States. Canada and Mexico take a lot of our business over the years, over 25, 30 years, especially during the Biden years. They took a lot of our business, and it's basically all coming back into the United States now. Well, hot as a pistol, and it's coming back in. Because of tariffs and the incentives we give, it's coming back. And it's impossible, I think, for another country to stop it. And we are working on something. We want to be very good to Canada. I like Carney a lot. I think he's a good person.
So some warm words there for the Prime Minister, who gave something up today. The White House called this long overdue and said that it looks forward to continuing talks. Mark Carney says that he was assured by Trump on their call yesterday that if he ditched some of these countermeasures, that trade talks would intensify and advance. Trump did say today that he plans on talking to Carney again and soon. And this comes after what appears to be a lull in talks after Canada and the U.S. failed to reach a deal by Trump's August 1st deadline.
What else did Trump say about the trade war today?
Well, Trump really hasn't been focusing on the trade war publicly this week. He's been spending a lot of time defending his decision to call in the National Guard to the Capitol and talking about his efforts to try and end the war in Ukraine. He even rummaged through his desk today and he pulled out a photo of himself with Russia's president, saying that he could be at the FIFA World Cup next year, which he announced is coming to Washington. So that shows you where his head is at. He has cut his deals. He's moved on to other issues. But with him and his administration, tariffs are always on the agenda, even if it's not front and center. He posted on Truth Social today that he's already talking about the next sector which he could hit with tariffs, which he says is furniture, and that a review is underway. He also talked about a new analysis from the Congressional Budget Office, which projects that his tariffs could reduce the country's deficit by $4 trillion over the next decade. But that analysis also says that tariffs will reduce the size of the U.S. economy, make consumer goods more expensive, and temporarily put upward pressure on inflation. Karina?
Thank you. CBC's Ashley Burke in Washington. And joining me now with reaction to today's tariff news is Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Welcome. You called this move by Carney a step in the right direction if it helps resolve remaining tariffs. How confident are you that that is the case?
Well, the if is very important. This could lead to a deal where we get relief on the 232 tariffs on auto, steel, and aluminum. If today's actions are creating a framework for those discussions to advance, then we are in a good place, and it is the right move because we need relief in this sector. The auto industry has taken on, so far, about $12 billion in tariff costs. This simply cannot continue. So I think the rationale that the government laid out today for why they've taken this action is sound, but we now need to see real progress on a very regular basis that we are getting to an agreement.
So you mean progress beyond just its restarting talks? Because we will speak with her in the next hour, but Unifor's national president, Lana Payne, said that walking back counter-tariffs isn't an olive branch and that it only enables more aggression. What do you make of that view?
Well, I think it's safe to say that so far the retaliatory measures haven't resulted in us getting to the table and getting a deal done. The U.S. has struck an agreement with Europe. They've done a deal with Japan, South Korea. We're now in this very bizarre environment where American manufacturers are at a disadvantage to companies that build vehicles in Europe and Japan. That makes absolutely no sense. So I think this should be the right move if it makes these discussions more positive and put some energy behind them. I haven't seen the evidence that the retaliation is helping in this current situation.
Although when you say makes no sense, I mean, there's many parts of this whole thing that often don't make sense, including, you know, the very stated goal by Donald Trump that he wants auto manufacturing and everything just to move south of the border. So at this point, and knowing that tariffs are probably never going away, what does a realistic resolution to the auto tariffs look like?
Well, I'm going to remain the eternal optimist here, simply because this is a very mutually beneficial trade relationship. First of all, the Americans have a trade surplus with Canada in automotive and auto parts. That's a fact. Secondly, Canada is the largest export destination for U.S. vehicles. This is a very important market for the U.S. manufacturing base. So there are a number of factors that lead me to believe that we will get to an agreement. We have to aim for complete tariff elimination, restore full USMCA tariff preferences in this trade relationship, and I will remain optimistic that we will get there, particularly when you look to the future and start talking about the transition to electric vehicles, critical minerals needs. You cannot do that without Canada. So we have something to offer here, and I think we will get to a mutually beneficial agreement.
In the meantime, though, tell me a little bit about the impact and the pain that the auto sector is feeling right now in Canada.
It's extremely painful, and people in this industry are worried about the future of the sector, and that's why there is a level of urgency. We are willing to give the government the benefit of the doubt that today's actions are going to get us to an agreement, but I want to be clear that this can't take months. We need relief as quickly as possible, because right now manufacturers, if you build a vehicle in Canada, the headline tariff rate is 25%. You get to back out your US content, so that gets you between 10 and 15%, call it. That is a significant tariff, and that makes it very hard to continue to produce at the levels we have produced traditionally in this country. This industry employs hundreds of thousands of Canadians and many good, well-paying jobs. So we have to get to relief. I see that the Prime Minister announced that there will be some measures with respect to making the industry more competitive and Canada more competitive. I just want to underline that we need to be ultra competitive. If we are in a world of tariffs going forward, Canada has to do everything possible to protect this footprint and grow this industry. And right now, there are a number of policies that are damaging this sector, and we can just tomorrow make a change and give relief to the industry.
Okay, so the clock is ticking.
It absolutely is.
Thank you very much for your time today. That is Brian Kingston, President and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Canada is keeping its retaliatory tariffs on U.S. steel, but they're half the level that President Donald Trump has imposed on Canada. We'll get reaction to today's announcement from Canada's steel industry coming up next. Starting September 1st, Canada will drop many of its retaliatory tariffs currently on U.S. goods. Prime Minister Mark Carney argues it's the right move since Canada has a better tariff deal with the U.S. than any other country does. But Canada will keep its counter-tariffs of 25% on U.S. steel, aluminum and autos. Today, Carney was asked why those haven't been raised to 50% to match U.S. tariffs.
We'll look at everything. We look at our industry both in terms of how we support their retooling, their investment in the industries, liquidity for today, helping their workers, buying Canadian, diversifying markets, but of course trade policy, including with the United States, is part of that. But we're engaged in discussions with the United States about exactly those sectors. And that's what we want to advance to the benefit of our workers and our economy.
Catherine Cobden is the president and CEO of the Canadian Steel Producers Association. Welcome. You have been calling for, as recently as yesterday, that Ottawa impose a 50% tariff on U.S. steel. Instead, what we saw today was the lifting of most retaliatory tariffs and the maintaining of a 25% tariff on U.S. steel. What is your reaction to that choice by the federal government?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the program. In fact, we're not just disappointed that the level of the tariff wasn't raised to 50%. We're also disappointed with the characterization of the tariff. In fact, in April, this government took down a lot of the steel tariffs. So about half, if not more, of the steel coming from the United States is coming in tariff-free.
You mean in terms of the type of steel products?
Correct.
Obviously, 25% didn't come down. Oh, the volume.
The volume of steel. So we actually have, as I think viewers will know, we have been struggling for every ton we can produce. We're in a massive crisis in the steel industry. And frankly, we want to be able to serve the domestic market further. And the U.S. market, the U.S. steel in our market is a problem. And so we are pretty disappointed in today's announcement. On one hand, we're very happy that the Prime Minister sees us as a priority, but frankly, we need actions that match those words. And we've been very simple and straightforward on the actions that we need, especially on retaliation for the United States.
Do you think he sort of hinted in today's news conference that it's a card he could still play, that Canada still has this card of the threat to raise tariffs to 50%? Is that something that you take at face value?
So, in our industry with what's going on, including what happened earlier this week with 407 more tariffs that are on our customers, we are no longer, we've pivoted away from building leverage with the United States through retaliation, and instead recognizing that retaliation on the United States is a method to save the steel industry in Canada, and it protects domestic jobs and domestic workers. And how it does that is it keeps the U.S. steel, out of our market and allows us instead to serve that market. It's a game. That is the battle, and the task at hand is to try to get as much of the domestic steel as we possibly can to offset U.S. steel. As an example, in July, we imported from the United States about 150,000 tons of steel. And do you know that 83% of that steel we could have made in Canada?
Is it about market access and then it's still just cheaper than if they're only tariffed at 25%, you're bringing in American steel?
Or zero.
Or zero in some cases, yes. So in terms of the volume going down. So I guess there's all this buy Canadian, we're going to buy Canadian steel. Why is that still happening?
Yeah, so it is going to, I'm sure over time it's going to pivot in the sense that, this government has also given the directive for federally funded projects, they will use Canadian steel. But two things. One is there's a lot of projects that are just getting going or haven't even, started. And secondly, there's a whole bunch of other people that use steel, not just the government or other governments. So there's still a lot of private companies that are using U.S. steel and offshore steel, and and that's really to the detriment of the domestic steel industry. So an easy solution is to retaliate on U.S. steel. I understand the dynamics. We want to be elbows down. That is the Prime Minister's call, not mine. But on steel, we really ought to be fighting for steel jobs in Canada with those measures.
Is there not a risk, though, when you think about that whole or bigger picture, if he were to raise the tariff to 50%, as you want, yes, certainly it would make it much more fair in terms of market access. We've been shut out of the U.S. They are still able to put steel into our market. But on the bigger negotiation, is there not a fear that Donald Trump will see that as a retaliation and suddenly talks are stalled again, or CUSMA's in jeopardy, or other things could happen?
We're really out of balance with equalization. There is a lot of escalation that is going on U.S. to Canada, like the 407 new tariffs on Monday. And I appreciate that we might need to go carefully. But at a minimum, the government reprieved, kind of gave a blanket remission to a significant volume of U.S. steel, and we're saying just put that back up. No one asked them to do that remission. That was a choice they made for all sorts of different reasons. We're saying, and not because the U.S. required it. So this isn't escalation. This is just doing what they've always said they were going to do, and that they said even today they were going to continue to do, but they're not doing it. That's the
50% would be an escalation.
The 50% would be an escalation. So, but I'm telling you, at this stage, get it at least to 25, and of course what we really want is 50, but 25 will at least give us some opportunity.
Just really quickly, can you paint a really succinct picture of how bad it is right now? And is there sort of an estimate in terms of survival stats for the Canadian steel industry if this drags on and drags on?
Right. So we're on life support. We are essentially, we've had a big gunshot wound. We have some places to go and get some medicine, but actually we have just had 407 more stabbings to the body on Monday with these new tariffs. So, what is the chance of survival? Well, if we're maintain the current path we're on without acceleration and urgency, it's a very, very bleak picture.
Okay, well, I hope it doesn't come to that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Okay.
Catherine Cobden with the Canadian Steel Producers Association. Coming up next, how will today's tariff rollback play out politically for the Prime Minister and his government? Our party insiders and a familiar face join us to talk about that after this break.
Canadian government will now match the United States by removing all of Canada's tariffs on U.S. goods specifically covered under CUSMA.
He's removing his tariffs, yeah.
Exactly.
He's removing his retaliatory tariffs, which I thought was nice. And we are working on something. We want to be very good to Canada. I like Carney a lot. I think he's a good person. And we had a very good talk yesterday, so I think it'll be good.
A move made today on Parliament Hill that got quick reaction from the Oval Office. Canada's decision to remove retaliatory tariffs on CUSMA-compliant U.S. goods seems to have pleased the president, but it received sharp opposition from the reminted opposition leader.
He promised he would have elbows up. He promised he could, quote, handle Trump, and that he would, quote, negotiate a win. Those are his promises, and he needs to be judged by his word. And this was not any promise, just any old promise on page 73 of his platform. It was the promise on which he ran his entire election campaign. And now he's abandoning it.
There is a lot of talk to have about this with our party insiders. Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor. Melanie Richet is a former communications director for the NDP. Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. And joining the panel for this big day is regular host of the show, David Cochrane. And David, we are going to start with you.
Long-time listener, first-time caller? All right.
I'm good. You were here with me at this table listening today to everything that happened. How do you think Canadians will respond to this move of dropping the reciprocal tariffs in terms of non-CUSMA-compliant goods?
Yeah, like my vacation's going great. But look, what I'm understanding since we were on listening to the Prime Minister earlier today is that this kind of became a necessity because it was becoming an irritant in the bigger talks, in that there is a carve-out for Canadian exports to the U.S. that are compliant with CUSMA, but there wasn't the other way. The retaliatory tariffs were hitting sectors in the United States because they were designed to be surgical and targeted that were compliant with the trade agreement. And that was becoming an irritation with the United States. And the concern is that if the U.S. took away its exemption for CUSMA compliant, then the Canadian economy is going to be in even more pain and more damage than it is already with the sectoral tariffs. And there's a level of escalation that the U.S. can go to that Canada can't go to. And, you know, it's become pretty clear that President Trump is not just using tariffs as a leverage position to get border security, to get defense spending. This is an article of faith for the Trump government to raise money, to repatriate manufacturing, and you need to remove as many irritants as you can to preserve this, the preferred market access on the larger trade agreement. And, you know, as much as you want to pivot away on trade and political connections, the geography, you're stuck there. So everything is a bit of an exercise in risk mitigation and loss mitigation with this president. And I think how Canadians judge it is going to be when we get to the outcome. There's going to be pivots and turns in the process, but it's where this lands and what you're able to show at the end. You know, it is going to be a worse trade deal than we had at the beginning of the year, but it can be better than it is at the midpoint of the year.
Fred, do you think that Canadians listening to the Prime Minister or even just seeing clips, because not everyone sat and listened through the whole news conference, do you think Canadians will understand why this was done?
We'll have to see how that plays out. It's one of those things where every few weeks there's just something moving on this file. It's a public negotiation of some sort. It feels like some could criticize the Prime Minister for giving up stuff, but we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. We don't know what those negotiations are, and that final outcome will be the ultimate, the way to tell who won or lost in this. The problem is we don't know when that's going to be, and if it keeps building and it keeps building, because the Prime Minister's got to get some win soon on this. It can't keep going the same way, because then it may get out from underneath him. He used a hockey analogy during the campaign. It became this liberal thing, elbows up, and I thought he explained it pretty well today. But sometimes when you got skating on the ice, your elbows are down. You're doing different things. We're in the middle, or maybe the beginning, or in the third period of a hockey game right now. We're not quite sure what the score is. It looks like we're down 2 or 3-0, but we're sitting there and we're criticizing from the sidelines. The game's not over, and until it's over, until that final score, we don't know what's happening here.
Greg, how patient do you think Canadians will be on this? I mean, everyone's saying he has some latitude. I don't think anyone expected a deal today, not once we blew past the August 1st deadline at least. How patient do you think Canadians will be?
Well, cynically, you can't help but notice that Canadians were pretty much on side for addressing climate change on things like carbon pricing, carbon tax, until the economy, and inflation went crazy. So there comes a point where, the average person says enough is enough. I think right now, I watched the clip of the Conservative leader, and I noticed he was trying really hard to say quote, unquote, because there's a lot of times where Conservative MPs are saying, Mark Carney said this, and then they play a clip, and he's not said anything close to what he's being described as saying. I keep asking myself, why do the Conservatives keep going there? And I think part of it is, if you look at, at polling about Canadians that support Trump are undoubtedly a member of the Conservative Party. So that is perhaps the audience they want for those messages. But the rest of Canadians are watching the guy who we just saw with the red hat that said Trump is right about everything. This is the President of the United States who is talking about grass, he's wandering around the roof of the White House. For Conservatives to get Canadians on board to what the Conservatives believe, Canadians have to ignore everything else that they're seeing about Donald Trump. Epstein files. He raided Bolton's house this morning. So, you have to have a lot of ignoring of what this guy is like to deal with in order to believe Pierre Poilievre.
Although there was expectation set up, right? And politics is about trying to meet those expectations. Totally. So how patient will Canadians be, even if they completely understand the kind of administration and president we're dealing with? What do you think Canadians' patience is for seeing what they were promised during the election?
I don't think it's very long, to be honest. I think, folks were away for the summer. I think people are taking a break. They see him say every different thing every different week, and they're giving it a rest. But kids are going back to school. I think people are going to start paying a little bit more attention. Folks are supposed to be coming back to Ottawa in, 3 weeks now? I think that timeline is getting shorter and shorter. I think today works if we hear something soon. If we don't hear something soon, then we backed off the digital service tax, we backed off this, and we're still waiting for anything. I do think that there's some time to play there with, because I think, as everybody has said, people have empathy for the Prime Minister that he's dealing with somebody that is so unpredictable. But unless you're able to show either that the removing of retaliatory tariffs is good for us, and it's good for us in these reasons, or you're able to show a deal or some sort of path to a deal with the president, I think folks are going to say, okay, well, you're backing off, you're backing off, you're backing off. How is this helping me? My friends who are working in steel are still losing their job. We're still hearing about businesses closing up shop and going to the U.S. because it's just too difficult. If you keep hearing those stories, I think the patience that people have will get shorter and shorter unless we start seeing something.
Well, and that's the importance of keeping the CUSMA compliance carve out, right? That you've got 85% of the exports that are still operating under the free trade agreement. You lose that, and that timeline shrinks. And because the contagion inside the economy of the damage, it spreads even faster, and the economic scarring is even deeper, right? So right now the sectoral tariffs are punishing, and you heard Catherine Cobden describing it in gunshot wound terms. You have sectors bleeding out. If it spread to all the other sectors, it would be an absolute economic nightmare for the country as we're trying to navigate what is almost certainly going to be a diminished trading relationship with the U.S. at the end of this.
But Fred, in terms of, let's say, steel and aluminum, but especially steel, which I think is perhaps the hardest hit right now, still waiting for some kind of relief. If people see the move today maybe not as a concession because it's all about CUSMA and trying to maintain CUSMA, but then they see that we don't have equal tariffs on steel and aluminum, will that make Canadians pause about whether they should see this as a concession or not?
Yeah, I don't think they'll understand it, to be honest. I don't think Canadians really get into the weeds on what's happening here. The people impacted by it will. The people in these communities who are in fact impacted and affected by it. I look at the riding of Algoma, big steel town. Doug Ford won that in this last Ontario election. The Ontario PCs have not won that riding before. And it was because the people there were very worried and wanted protection, and they felt he could help do that. So this is something, he's out today. I think he's disappointed by some of the stuff we're seeing. And you're going to see different parts of the country impact in raising it up that way.
Well, Mel, Doug Ford has not been shy about saying he believes in like fighting back. And even today's statement was, okay, while we're trying to get this, but if we don't see results soon.
Very careful language.
Very careful today, but in terms of the places that are hardest hit, especially when we're talking about steel and we're talking about Ontario, or we're talking about autos, very much Ontario. We're not just talking about an issue for Mark Carney. So in terms of other politicians who might be worried about this and yet have no say really in how we go forward, what should they be worried about?
I think it's the communication and where this goes. You know, you talk about folks in Algoma. They're really worried. What does that look like? I just think of so many people in my universe who love bourbon have not had bourbon in so long. And you know, we're kind.
Bit of a first world problem, but
but you know what I mean? Like they are kind, but they will not do that. So many people in my family love going to the States. We're in the States, you know, however many times. They will not go. And that is because they refuse to, you know, say that this is okay. So I think in the, you know, what can politicians say or not say? I think it's communicating the why. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert on policy on whether we should or we shouldn't and how that's going to impact our country. But what I will say is, if you are not telling me here's the benefit of doing this and here's the benefit of not, then I'm just going to see you saying, okay, well, we're going to try this, we're going to back off and see if he'll be kind back when he has at every opportunity showed us that he doesn't know what that is. So, you know, if I'm at home and I'm talk to those folks who are going to the U.S., who aren't buying U.S. products and are going out of their way to change their habits so that they do find Canadian products, Canadian stores, et cetera, you got to make sure that you're communicating to those folks why you're doing this, because that to me is communication doesn't really work. And I would not be understanding why, you know, I'm doing all these things to stand up for Canada, to make sure that I'm standing up for my neighbors, and this is what I'm seeing from the government.
Greg, there is some concern that this is the kind of president that you give an inch, he'll take a mile, and he'll keep asking for miles after that, that there is no stopping the need for concession and appeasement. How does Mark Carney deal with that if it turns out that today's move does not get the results in some kind of time? Like, what is his messaging then if, okay, I've done all this because I thought I was the right guy for this, but we're still stuck where we are now?
Yeah, it's really difficult in that, you know, you're negotiating with somebody who, you know, how many things have we been told that this is really about? Fentanyl? You know, all the other, you know, lists of things, and it's never really happened. But today we saw the president, and this is, you know, I think probably, you know, if I'm an advisor to Carney, I'm probably cringing and, you know, faint praise when the president says nice things about you. But at some point, whether true or not, it became a talking point about Justin Trudeau that part of the big problem with Trump was that Trump disliked him. And then at some point at the very beginning, though, the efforts, you know, the you know, Broadway diplomacy that they tried with Come From Away and working with Ivanka Trump, all these things, like the Trudeau people at the very beginning, they did do an honest college try to have a good relationship with him, and it goes awry. So the Carney people would absolutely know that. But there is something beyond, retaliatory tariffs in what Mel just talked about, where it's Canadians have the choice not to travel to the United States. And I'm following places like Buffalo and Las Vegas and Cape Cod, and you see the horrendous hit to the tourism industry that they're experiencing right now. That will take a while to fold through. In Alberta, even the Premier allowed American alcohol to be sold again. Albertans are passing. I saw a CBC Alberta story a couple of weeks ago where the numbers of, you know, whether they can get Jack Daniels or not, they don't want to buy it if they can find something else. So Canadians are going to help along with this as far as they can.
David, the Prime Minister has said he's learned a lot. We've all learned a lot as the situation evolves. In the beginning, the Trudeau government thought retaliatory tariffs was the right way to go because it's what we did last time. And it seemed to really, you know, put the pressure on where it was needed, especially in those red states and that kind of thing. what more might we learn going forward that we aren't expecting? Sorry, did you get out your crystal ball for me?
Yeah, exactly.
What more might we learn that Mark Carney is going to have to deal with?
Well, you know, it's kind of to Greg's point. You go back to the beginning of the year, right, in the run-up to the Inauguration Day and the Liberation Day and Tariff Day 2 and Tariff Day 3 and Tariff Day 4. It was like, okay, he is doing this to get us to do something, right? And that's just not what it is, folks. Like, he, you know, believes, the president does, in a trade policy of tariffs to generate revenue, because sort of the political agenda of the United States for the past decades has been to starve the beast, right? Cut income sources, cut taxes to the point that you can never have a big government. And now they have this massive out of control sort of deficit where they add like $1 trillion to the debt every 100 days. So they need money and they don't want to raise taxes on people. So they've essentially created a consumption tax in the form of tariffs. So the recognition is sinking into the world, you know, as even an island filled with penguins and the European Union and Japan and Canada have all been hit with tariffs of some form, that this is here to stay. So when you pull back and you look at that global picture and you think about how do you solve this, it's like, well, can you solve this? Like, there is no threshold of appeasement that gets him to say no tariff. So, like, you know, we heard the Prime Minister say today that this is the reality they have to do. Like, that is being criticized by the opposition leader as, you know, as the elbows down, you know, as capitulation and concession. Yes, or is it evolution? Like, what is it? Because, you know, you heard Pierre Poilievre say, I would have negotiated from a position of strength. I would have gone in and said to the president respectfully, I will take down my tariffs if you take down yours. I'm like, Canada's tried that. Europe's tried that. Every country on earth has tried that, and there are tariffs everywhere.
He was asked this question. I've said this before. When Poilievre was asked about this, what would you say to how would you handle the president? He said, I would tell him to knock it off. I think that was kind of an example of where Canadians start to have some questions about whether or not this was the right person to face Donald Trump.
Well, but like, I think a lot of the context has completely changed since the election, right? Like, you had the election, you had the Oval Office meeting, then you started conversations, and then you saw the global trade agenda, right? Like, where you just started hammering everybody. So it's not just a bilateral fight anymore. It is a much bigger thing that, you know, sort of the country that led the creation of the post-World War II global order on trade, security, and cooperation is now blowing it up. And, you know, everyone is kind of a victim in this because they have no control over it, and you cannot apply sort of rational analysis to it because it's completely unpredictable.
Although the U.S. ambassador to Canada would say that the U.S. is a victim.
This has been a persistent yes.
Fred, what did you make of what Pierre Poilievre said today in terms of when he came out and reacted to the Prime Minister's move?
It was interesting. He came out and talked about the Sovereignty Act that he wants to introduce in the fall, which he, you know, could have mentioned during C5. I think would have been a good time in the spring, given its similar messaging. I think he's trying to find his footing on this. He's trying to find his message and what the message track is. I think he has an opportunity to be a strong statesman here and give the Liberal government rope here. Give them rope to hang themselves if they don't get this done. But by coming out and being kind of goofy today and saying like, hey, I would have just gone down and say, you know, you take the tariffs off, I'll take ours off. That just doesn't work. No one buys that. And then he got a bit goofy in his press conference too, talking about like, steal my ideas. Like, present them, make them look like good, concrete, legitimate ideas. Don't, like, take the goofiness away. He has this tone problem. Either he's too negative and now he's just sometimes too goofy. And I think that's one of the things he's got to figure out. He's got a few weeks before the House comes back. He doesn't seem to be trying to do it, but we'll see.
So that leads me to a question about the NDP. Obviously, because of the diminished size of the NDP right now, we're not really hearing from the party on this. When the House comes back, how should they make themselves heard?
Right. I think that there's an opportunity for them to really tackle the, you know, where are we, or what are we doing to support the workers that are impacted by this? I know we're hearing that, but we're usually hearing it from we're going to support the businesses so that they have the supports that they need. We're not necessarily hearing how are we supporting workers, how are we supporting working families, whether their jobs are on the line or not. We know that costs will be increased, et cetera. I think that that's a good place for the party to spend their time. I also think it's okay that they're a little bit quiet now. I think it's important that they continue to show up and that they continue to say something on these important things, but we are going into a rebuild, we're going into a leadership race. The folks who are putting their name forwards will be putting those ideas forward, and it'll be an opportunity for the party to debate them. I just don't want them to not have a seat at the table in the meantime. So just under the radar a little bit is okay for now.
It's okay for now. So we only have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to do like a really quick round. In terms of what we saw during the election, personality and credibility played a lot, and sort of to what Fred was saying, you know, people have to actually believe what you're saying if you're saying something bad about the other person. Going forward, how much does credibility play a role in how Canadians will perceive how we're doing in this? Greg, we'll start with you.
Hugely, and I, you know, the way the Prime Minister handled the press conference today, you know, came right after a cabinet meeting. You know, they had something to say. You could certainly feel it, you know, in the Ottawa bubble that this was, you know, there was going to be an intense announcement today. The other thing that I think works for him, and this is perhaps the NDP should do as well, is Bob Canoe, Premier Eby. There are new Democrat premiers. Doug Ford seems to be on side. Premier Houston in Nova Scotia. That helps the Prime Minister's credibility as well, in that he's working with the majority of the provincial partners.
Mel, real quick.
Yeah, I think I'll be maybe less kind than you were on interesting. I think he just sounded silly. Like, I don't think he knew what he was talking about. Pierre Poilievre, yeah, sorry. And I think that'll be the big tell in September is the Prime Minister going to continue to kind of run unopposed, really, which is what has been happening, or will Poilievre find his message?
Really quick.
91% of Canadians are see this economic situation as incredibly dangerous and threatening. And it's serious times, and we need serious leadership, and whoever plays that part is going to have a big advantage.
Last word to you, Dave.
Eventually, you've got to start delivering some outcomes. Right now, the pressure has been on narrow, specific sectors: steel, you know, aluminum, auto, lumber. We go into this CUSMA review, you're going to add dairy to that. You're going to add your supply management sectors, maybe your cultural sectors, because, you know, Trump has targeted these. So the issue set is very difficult for the government right now and the country right now. It's going to get more difficult as we move into this. So credibility matters. Process is not a response. It's outcomes that are going to need to start happening here, and they've got to get some traction on this pretty soon.
Okay, thank you all. Greg McEachern, Fred Delory, Lenny Richer, and David Cochrane, who has one more week of holiday, from what I understand, and then he'll be back in this spot. Lots more to come on Power and Politics. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has long said Canada must hit back hard against U.S. tariffs. We'll get reaction to this move from Ford's U.S. trade representative. And Unifor President Lana Payne says this isn't an olive branch. It only invites more U.S. aggression. She'll join us with that criticism. But first, we've got reaction from businesses just ahead with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Prime Minister Mark Carney is rolling back many of Canada's retaliatory tariffs on the U.S., arguing it's time to stick handle with the U.S. after dropping the gloves early in President Donald Trump's trade war.
There is a time in a game, in a big game, and this is a big game, when you go hard in the corners, your elbows up. The time in a game where you drop the gloves in the first period and you send a message. And we've done that pretty uniquely in the world. We happen to have the best deal with the Americans right now, I'd note. But there's also a time in a game where you want the puck, you want to stick handle, you want to pass, you want to put the puck in the net. And we're moving later into the game, and we're at that time in the game.
So for now, Canada's tariffs are being pulled off all U.S. goods covered under CUSMA. But retaliatory tariffs will remain on U.S. steel, aluminum, and autos. We want to get some reaction from the business community. Pascal Chan is the Vice President of Strategic Policy and Supply Chains at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. He joins me now. Welcome. You're saying that the moves made by Carney's government today will have significant ripple effects for supply chains, employers, and consumers. If you can explain, what are those ripple effects?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've seen a number of these announcements over the course of since President Trump's election. Going forward, we've seen significant trade disruption, especially with our largest trading partner. And given Canada's dependence on trade and the integrated nature of our supply chains with the U.S., ultimately, every single shift is significant. And this is far and away the biggest issue for businesses. Now, when you're talking about some of these industries that are extremely hard hit, like steel and aluminum, where tariffs remain on and counter-tariffs remain on, you're talking about significant jobs, production, and given the amount of trade we have across the border in those specific commodities, obviously this is going to impact our economy and largely a lot of the downstream industries that are impacted and that consume steel and aluminum especially.
Now, Mark Carney has said that the government is matching what the U.S. is doing, at least in terms of, the CUSMA-compliant goods. Do you see it that way?
Well, there's a number of ways to look at it, obviously, and even within the membership of the Canadian Chamber, as we cover kind of all sectors of business, there's a diversity of opinions. Some will say that it doesn't go far enough and they like to see kind of stronger measures to protect certain industries. And there's also some that feel that these measures are important and a nuanced approach is critical to maintaining and protecting some of the manufacturing businesses that rely on the imports of steel from the U.S. as well. Now, as far as the long-term view, we need to see some stability. We have not seen that in some time. Obviously, the lack of predictability in all of these trade announcements mean that we've seen volatility in the markets especially, but as well, it's very difficult for businesses to plan, and if they can't plan, they can't make strategic business investment that is going to allow them to kind of secure our economic future. So having a long-term view and a long-term plan, as we see in the distance, the CUSMA review in 2026 coming up and ongoing negotiations, alignment is likely what was being pushed for here, and it certainly seems that way.
What can the government do, though, to try and create more certainty when you're dealing with the U.S. administration the way it is?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot that's going on, and it's difficult. We're not going to be able to predict what happens, and we've seen, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of back and forth. And just looking at the events of this week, we saw an expanded list of products that are covered under the steel and aluminum tariffs that was announced, I believe, on Wednesday. And then we saw the conversation between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump yesterday, as well as the, we'll say, positive reaction that came out of that, that led up to today's announcement. Now, there have been a number of individual issues that have come up, right? We've seen fentanyl come up, we've seen NATO spending, we've seen the digital services tax as well, but we've also seen tariffs and then retaliatory tariffs. We've seen the revenge tax, that was a measure included in the One Big Beautiful Bill as well, come out. So it's been a long negotiation and will continue to be rocky going forward, but I think the standard has been lack of predictability, and that's what we've been contending with going forward, and that's been the top issue for businesses across the country.
How seriously should the Carney government keep in their back pocket the potential to raise retaliatory tariffs on the sectors like steel and aluminum? Right now, we're not at the same level as what the U.S. has put on us. How serious a playing card, negotiating card is that?
I think that everything is basically a serious card when you look at where it could potentially impact what the U.S. imports from us as well. There are a number of things that are going on. We've talked about various sectors that could be folded into the discussion as well. Look, we're going to have to deal with this current reality, and we're going to have to find a way to get towards, a stable agreement or again, a predictable outcome for businesses. And so we need to look at a balanced approach that's going to talk about potentially more retaliatory tariffs or less, as well as measures that are going to support businesses that are going to be affected by this as we go forward. But again, we'll have to approach that on a case-to-case basis to make sure that we're making the right decisions.
So really quickly, you did mention the DST.
Yep.
Many people are seeing this as another concession.
Yep.
Are we giving up leverage? Are we starting to lose leverage as we go forward?
Well, as we've kind of noted, there's a complete lack of predictability in what's going on. So we have to deal with these issues one at a time. We're not behind closed doors in a lot of these negotiations. But as I did mention, in that circumstance with the digital services tax, there was the revenge tax element of the One Big Beautiful Bill that came out. So whether you want to see that as an equivalence or something that was given in concession to get that and get things back on board and negotiations progressing is up to kind of you to determine. But obviously, we've seen a lot of back and forth that should be taken into consideration as we move forward on this.
Thank you very much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Karina.
Pascal Chan with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. So, with many retaliatory tariffs being removed, what kind of bargaining position does this leave Canada in? Coming up, former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, who's a member of the Prime Minister's Council on U.S. Relations. Prime Minister Mark Carney says Canada will drop some of its retaliatory tariffs against the United States in a move Carney says is matching President Trump.
The situation we're in now is that Canada and the United States have reestablished free trade for the vast majority of our goods. Canada will retain our tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos as we work intensively with the United States to resolve the issues there.
Carney says this is part of Canada's strategy to defend its unique position, saying Canada currently has the best trade deal with the United States. Jean Charest is a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations and the former Premier of Quebec. Good afternoon. Has Prime Minister Carney weakened Canada's negotiation position by making this move today?
No, not in any way, no. I mean, this is, and Karina, let's, first of all acknowledge that there's nothing conventional about the negotiations we now have with the United States, given the personality of Donald Trump, but we do have a better line of sight. There's a lot of that has happened in the last few weeks that gives Canada a better line of sight of what kind of an agreement that we can come to, given the fact that they've concluded agreements with Europe and Japan and South Korea, and what finally they're looking for. And part of it is investment. But in our case, we have special circumstances. We are benefiting tremendously from CUSMA. 85% of what we send across the border is tariff-free. The average tariff is 5.6%. And so we're in a good position in that respect. The tough part of it for Canada is steel, aluminum, autos, copper. Those are the areas in which there is some pain in our economy.
Well, that's what I did want to ask about that, because Mark Carney argues today's move is about matching the U.S. approach. So now the whole CUSMA compliant. But the one thing we haven't matched on is steel and aluminum and autos. We are facing 50% tariffs, and they only have to deal with 25% tariffs. We have not raised those. So considering the sectoral tariffs are the biggest sticking point right now, is this move about opening the door for that, and keeping that card sort of in our pocket that we could raise those tariffs? Or I guess, what should we make about this response when it comes to the sectoral tariffs?
We still have that card, and we can still use that card. But we have to be very smart in the way that we go ahead with this. Keep in mind, Karina, every time we do retaliatory tariffs, we hurt ourselves. I mean, and we know that, and we're very conscious. No one, is downplaying that, but and it's part of the world of bad choices of which we have to live. But let's try to be smart about how we do this. We do impose 25% retaliatory tariffs on steel and aluminum. There's a lot of work being done behind the scenes in different sectors to try to come to agreements, including those businesses in the aluminum and the business sector in particular who are talking to each other and trying to propose something to governments on what could be a deal. So we just have to be very smart on this. But what is it that we need to protect? What is really, the central goal for us? And one of it is to protect CUSMA, to maintain it, to keep it in place, and to prepare for those negotiations. And in the meantime, preparing means dealing with these 50% tariffs on steel, aluminum, and the tariffs on autos, so that we're in a better position to do a CUSMA negotiation that will be beneficial for us and for our other partners, including the States and Mexico.
And I want to get to a CUSMA question in a second, but I just wanted to go over the Prime Minister's hockey analogy today and ask what you make of it. So we obviously don't know I don't know what's happening where these talks are privately. You may have more insight being on the council, but his position is that we're moving later into the game, where you want the puck and you want to stick handle, and I believe he said, you want to pass and you want to get the puck in the net. Regardless of whether you're a hockey fan or not, and I'm sure you are, what do you take as his meaning from that?
Well, look at it this way. There's things we know today that we didn't see or know only a few weeks ago. And that includes the agreement that was negotiated by Europe, by Japan, by Indonesia, by Vietnam, by South Korea. And we know from those agreements that there is going to be a baseline of tariffs. We know from those agreements also, Karina, that Canada and Mexico are in a different position from these countries because we're in North America. We do know that on the American side, what we're hearing is that they do want to keep CUSMA, though that's not a given, but generally they do want to keep CUSMA. So as we learn from these negotiations, we're putting ourselves in a position where we're securing CUSMA as much as we can, which is exactly the announcement today. We are matching the fact that the Americans have, on the 1st of August, carved out CUSMA to protect merchandise trade. So we're doing that, and then we're going to focus on the bigger items of steel, of aluminum, of cars, to try to get an agreement. And by the way, writ large, one of the things that we're doing differently from these other countries in dealing with issues that are proper to North America, defense, security, these are big ticket items for both countries that will allow us to focus on these items before we reach the moment where we open up the CUSMA negotiations.
Now, you see, I didn't even have to ask my CUSMA question because you just answered it. So we have to leave it there because we're out of time, but thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Karina. Bye-bye.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford has made his position on U.S. tariffs clear. Canada can't roll over, it must punch back. So what does his government think of today's retaliatory rollback? We'll ask Ford's U.S. Trade Representative David Patterson next. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he spoke to the Prime Minister following today's announcement about the removal of counter-tariffs. Ford is calling for a U.S. deal that brings relief to tariff-exposed sectors in his province, saying in a statement, if the federal government can't achieve that, they need to hit back hard against U.S. tariffs and provide additional supports for the workers and businesses in these sectors. That comes just days after Ford warned the Prime Minister not to give in.
We should hit him back twice as hard, and I've said this to the Prime Minister. If you roll over, this guy just keeps beating you and beating you and beating you. No, let's start hitting back.
David Patterson is Ontario's representative in Washington. Welcome. So we all know Premier Ford has been very vocal, saying Canada needs to bargain from a position of strength and has urged Carney not to, quote, roll over. Do you think today's move by the Prime Minister represents rolling over?
Well, Karina, we in Ontario and the provinces, I mean, first and foremost, we've got to be always thinking about the people in Sault Ste. Marie and Hamilton, in Oshawa and Brampton and Windsor, because these 232 tariffs and the fact that they've frankly even expanded more with the addition of derivative steel products is a real concern for us in Ontario in particular. And so I think we understand that this is an important opening. I know that my colleagues in the embassy in Washington are going to be anxious to get back and try and land a deal, and hopefully very, very quickly. But if we can't see some much better treatment on 232 tariffs than we've seen around the rest of the world, probably it's time to circle the wagons again. And good thing that we've done so much work to try and find alternate sources for steel and other products, but much more work to do there too.
Well, yeah, more work if we go by what we're hearing from the steel industry, which is still the imports of U.S. steel are outmatching our use of domestic steel. But I wanted to ask about the steel tariffs and how, yes, we're matching the U.S. today on the CUSMA-compliant retaliatory tariffs, but we're not matching on sectoral tariffs. Is that a move you'd like to see the federal government make?
Well, I think we want to see the federal government back onto the playing field and trying to get these tariffs reduced down to zero if we can, and do much better. I mean, I think Jean Charest was commenting quite appropriately that now we have the benefit of seeing what the deals were around the world with the other major trading partners. These are the other major countries and areas like the EU that are also big auto trading nations with the United States, but they don't have to follow the rules of origin that we do here under the CUSMA agreement. So we should be doing much better. And so that's a challenge. We've been working away at that. And I spend a lot of my time as well with American businesses, with American auto industry, American aviation industry, and they are starting to very much feel the pinch of these tariffs as well. We saw that in the earnings of General Motors. We saw that in the earnings of Ford, losing $1 billion in a quarter because of tariffs. And we're seeing that in other parts of the U.S. economy. So now is a time, if the president wants to get ahead of some of the inflation that he's causing with these manufacturing taxes, which is what they are, they're manufacturing taxes on America, it would be a very good start to start removing some of the tariffs on steel, aluminum, automotive, at least reduce them much more than we're seeing in some of the other nations. I think there's an opportunity to do that now. And I think there's an audience in the business community on both sides of the border for that right now.
Now, the Prime Minister did indicate today that both the U.S. and Canada are now really working intensively, that this is going to jumpstart things and that the focus really will be those sectoral tariffs, especially steel and aluminum. What is your understanding from Washington about how much progress is being made on that file to find arrangements that could somehow mitigate or alleviate the tariff levels we're dealing with right now?
Yeah, well, I mean, we made really important progress back in March vis-a-vis the rest of the world when we started to acknowledge, both the United States and Canada, that we should have duty-free trade on CUSMA related goods. We now see today that same benefit coming to American goods coming back and forth. So we have a difference. As again, the Premier mentioned, we're a CUSMA-based trading nation. And with the exception of Korea, most of these other countries did not have any kind of agreement like we have. And the United States needs that as much as we do. We need our supply chains. We need those types of things going forward. We did retaliate on the steel tariffs. Canada did, the federal government, that's their job. They did a 25% retaliation. Initial, no other country in the world did, by the way, but they're all still staying with a 50% tariff on their steel and their aluminum. So we need to do better. We have that as a 50% tariff on aluminum and steel. It's really hurting our industry. We can only pivot so much to what we can do ourselves, but the province is doing everything it can to both help workers, but also help the companies to make that adjustment. The best solution, though, is to have America and Canada back in the same court and helping each other and helping our businesses, which are just so completely intertwined.
But do you really think that the U.S. administration, after all we've seen, all the moves, really gets that idea about mutual benefit and the idea that we can benefit from being on the same page as opposed to adversarial? And do you, in your talks in Washington, do you get a sense that they want to reach an agreement?
Yeah, I do. I deal with the staff to Commerce Secretary Lutnick and Jameson Greer. We deal with people in Congress that deal with the president every day, and it is in the self-interest of the United States to have a competitive auto sector, to have a competitive aviation sector. And Canada offers some other things that are really, really important too, that we talk about on the show all the time, such as our nickel and our other critical minerals and the like. But let's not forget, we are their biggest market as well. We buy over 20% of all the vehicles made in the United States. Nobody else does that. Japan buys maybe 1%. Korea buys maybe 1% of the vehicles produced in the United States. So they don't want to lose that Canadian market. So we see that. We see the pressures of these cost increases from these manufacturing taxes on American business flowing through. We haven't heard that loud and clear yet, but I think I really start to see that business will be a very important ally for Canada in terms of getting this across the goal line.
Thank you very much for your time today. David Patterson is Ontario's representative in Washington. Just last hour, I spoke to Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc. I asked him what cards this government has left in negotiations with the Trump administration.
We have opportunities where we can invest in projects as Canadians and Americans that will be critical to economic growth in both countries. So we have a lot of resources and a lot of trading opportunities that the Americans are very interested in. As you said in your opening, these counter tariffs were put in February. The Americans subsequently exempted CUSMA-compliant goods. It wasn't on the very first day they announced their tariffs. A couple of days later, I remember a conversation I had with Secretary Lutnick. He told me that they would be announcing that CUSMA-compliant imports into the United States would be exempted from these tariffs. Canada hadn't taken that step, and the United States a few weeks ago, for the first time, publicly in an official presidential executive order, committed to respecting the CUSMA-compliant exemption, which puts Canada, as the Prime Minister said, in the best position of any other country right now in terms of a trading relationship with the United States. It's not where we want to be. It's not where we were 8 months ago, but we still have a significant marginal advantage, and maintaining tariffs that were not respecting the CUSMA exemption that the Americans had put in place some months ago, in our view, was unwise.
Why not increase the sectoral tariffs, though? If, as the Prime Minister said, this is about matching, about being on the same playing field, but we don't have the same level of tariffs on their steel and aluminum and autos as they do have on ours. What was the thinking behind not going forward with that?
The situation with respect to autos is quite similar. It mirrors largely our
okay, but steel and aluminum
tariffs.
does not.
Right. Right. And look, the Prime Minister, I think I saw in the news conference, answered the question that because we believe there is an opportunity in the coming weeks to come to a bilateral deal with the United States that will put us in a better position than we're in this evening with respect to those sectors that they've targeted with these sectoral tariffs. The challenge is, Karina, whether it's steel, aluminum, automobiles, or softwood lumber is adjacent to this conversation, but critical for the Canadian economy. These are areas where we're the most integrated of any other country with the United States in the supply chains. And they have, in the trading agreements they've reached with other countries, not provided relief on these sectoral tariffs. So it is a significant challenge for us. But while the Prime Minister, following his conversation with the President and my conversations with Secretary Lutnick, while there is an opportunity, in our view, to work towards a bilateral agreement, we're going to continue to pursue that. And if we get to a different conclusion, the Prime Minister will make the decisions that would be appropriate then.
Now, obviously, critics, even people who are not always critics of the Liberal governments. So, you know, whether we're talking about Unifor's Lana Payne or others, seeing this more as appeasement, elbows down, that this is just giving in. What do you say to those critics who also say that every time we appease Donald Trump and the U.S. administration, as we did with the DST, the Digital Services Tax, that we're just showing that we're willing to go more and more? And especially, how do you know, if someone's insatiable in terms of what the appeasements they're looking for, when do you draw the line?
Well, these are always the judgment calls, Karina, that the government and obviously in this case the Prime Minister make. But it's not sort of, you have to be careful not to take one slice of time and come to a very rigid conclusion. We are in the best position of any country right now in terms of the overall tariff rate applied to our exports to the United States. The American government committed to that in an executive order. Very, very important to the economic security of our country that CUSMA be respected. The Americans will trigger in the coming weeks, we believe, their domestic process around consultation to get ready for the CUSMA review, which will start in 2026, built into the agreement. We're doing the same thing. And we think it's responsible to get to that conversation around a review of CUSMA, something that I'm in Mexico City next week talking to the Secretary of the Economy, Secretary Ebrard, precisely around how we can work together in the CUSMA review process. So we have to get to that conversation in the most coherent posture possible. And the Prime Minister's decision today very much lines up in that way.
Is today's move really more about CUSMA than working towards a bilateral agreement in the interim? I mean, how much in jeopardy is the government worried CUSMA is in?
But they can both be true at the same time, Karina. Our hope is that we can come to a bilateral arrangement which takes some pressure off the sectoral tariffs, but recognizing that, as I said a second ago, other countries in their trading agreements with the U.S. haven't been successful in the sectoral tariffs. We think that because of the integration, because of their dependency on things like aluminum, because of the integration of the supply chains in automobiles, like we talk to these business leaders and these workers' representatives, the union leaders as well, we are in a different case with respect to other countries in this area. Let's see if we're able to get a bilateral arrangement. But this, so if we are, great. If it's in the interest of the Canadian economy, the Prime Minister will make that decision. If it's not the right deal for Canada, he won't. But along the road, we're also preparing at the same time and in consequence thereof for the CUSMA review conversation. We're going to be consulting Canadian industry. I was on a call with a number of leaders in the steel, aluminum, and automobile sector with Ambassador Hillman today. But we're only going to intensify that work as we get ready for that discussion. It's critical to the Canadian economy that we engage in that conversation in the most prepared and thoughtful way, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Now, I know I only have you for 30 seconds more because I know you have other commitments. So I will ask this question really quickly.
So do you. You got other people on your show too, Karina.
First guest is always a priority. Did the Prime Minister give Canadians a false sense of expectations during the election? Has this turned out to be a lot harder than anyone expected?
I don't think so. The Prime Minister was elected on a mandate to navigate the country's economy through the turbulence that President Trump has imposed on the global trading system. The decisions that the president took in March and in February are different than the ones he took in July in terms of other trading agreements he signed. So the American government has evolved their posture particularly on sectoral tariffs, and has made very little exception, has in fact made no exception for any of their trading partners around the world. So that wasn't the picture that they were presenting to the world in February or March. The situation evolves. The great thing for us is Prime Minister Carney remains unequivocally the best leader with the most experience and the most insight in how Canada can both grow our own economy by building big projects again. That was the other part of our election campaign, but navigating through this turbulence with the Americans in a way that protects Canadian workers and Canadian industry. I'm enormously confident as we look out over the next few weeks and few months in the CUSMA review, and grateful that Mr. Carney has his hand on the tiller.
That was Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc. U.S. President Donald Trump is commending the move by Canada today.
He's removing his tariffs, yeah. He's removing his retaliatory tariffs, which I thought was nice. We are working on something. We want to be very good to Canada. I like Carney a lot. I think he's a good person. And we had a very good talk yesterday, so I think it'll be good.
Brian Topp is a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. Mr. Topp, does today's move by the Prime Minister weaken Canada's position at the negotiating table?
Maybe not. We'll see. Look, I think what Canadians are in the mood for with their American neighbors is to fight. But what we need to do is see if we can settle this dispute. And so what we're dealing with here is some retaliatory tariffs that were put in place at a time when it looked like the United States was implementing, complete across-the-board, economy-wide illegal tariffs in flagrant violation of our trade agreements. But then it turned out, and confirmed in the last 2 weeks, that the United States was putting their across-the-board tariffs in place, except for products that were compliant with our trade agreement with CUSMA. And so I guess you could say at some point we need to look for ways to de-escalate this dispute. And in a circumstance in which they put on a whole bunch of across-the-board illegal tariffs and then opened a huge door to avoid paying them by saying that CUSMA-compliant products are exempted, then I think it's reasonable to make a chess move to try to de-escalate this dispute and look for a door out.
Now, you characterize it as a chess move. The Prime Minister is portraying it as matching the U.S. approach. But we're not matching 100% because Canada did not increase our counter-tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum. So we've got 25% on their steel and aluminum. They still have 50% on ours. What do you make of that?
Well, what I make out of that is that we sure as heck are not out of the woods yet, that's for sure. I mean, we have a slightly less bad situation than it looked like when this all started. And so I think a peace offering, if you will, can be justified. But exactly as you say, we still have some really big problem here, which is some serious assaults on the heart of our industrial economy, auto and steel and aluminum, forestry, pharmaceuticals, completely unacceptable and arguably illegal tariffs that have not been dealt with yet. And so we have to stay at the table. We are essentially matching them, if you will, but we tried not to keep escalating them. And we're going to continue to have, as I understand it, a conversation with the Americans to see what can be done about that. With another piece of the puzzle here, which is we're getting closer to the reopener that is going to result in this whole trade agreement being reviewed. And so that is another challenge, another piece of the puzzle here. It could be that that this dispute over these sectors is simply going to roll forward and be dealt with as part of the overall review of this trade agreement.
Well, yeah, there is definitely bracing for the review, and that is sort of the big elephant in the room. Lana Payne, who's president of Unifor, but also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations, says this is not an olive branch, or she's not characterizing it as a chess move, but in fact says it enables more U.S. aggression. And we know earlier this summer, Canada also walked back the digital services tax just to get talks restarted. Are we running out of cards to play?
Well, look, to be clear, I think the digital move was a mistake, and it was an example of playing guess the number in my head with a very aggressive counterparty. We were just desperately throwing things at them to try to get them to settle down, and what we learned is guess the number in my head is not a very good approach to bargaining. So Lana may be right. We'll see. She knows a lot about bargaining. I've been in a little bit of bargaining too, and as she knows well, sometimes you just have to keep restating your position and say that you're never gonna budge from it, and sometimes you need to look for ways that you can start to move. I think going from across the board economy-wide tariffs to tariffs that had a CUSMA exception is a change that the Americans made, and it justified a response. But we are no way out of this dispute yet, as we've just been discussing. I mean, we have the heart of it is these completely unacceptable assaults on the heart of our economy. And Lana, of course, will care passionately about the auto industry and the steel industry. She has many members at stake, and we still haven't found our way out of that. But we have to start somewhere. At the end of the day, we're going to have to find a way to resolve this dispute. And of course, what it all reminds us is that we have to stop being so dependent on this one trade partner. And we learn again and again at every step of these proceedings that we are far, far too vulnerable to the whims of what coming out of Washington and to American politics. And it's urgent that we find new trade partners.
Now, today is also an important anniversary for the NDP in that, as you reminded me before we went on air, that it's the anniversary of Jack Layton's death. I'm wondering what you think he would make of all of this if he was still with us.
Well, You're right to note that this is a big day for Democrats and for Canadians, because I think most Canadians found themselves kind of liking Jack at the end there, and he died a tragic death on this date 14 years ago. And Jack Layton was a really, really nice guy, and it's a shame that we lost him. It really is. And every year I find myself thinking that, and all of his friends find themselves thinking that. And as to what he thought about this, I have a pretty good idea of what he would have done. First of all, he would have fought like hell, which is what we're trying to do. And secondly, he would have looked for a way out, which is also what we're trying to do. And he would have been asking the same questions that I was asking a minute ago, which is how do we make ourselves less vulnerable to this highly unreliable and mercurial trade partner upon whom we are far, far too dependent.
Brian Topp, thank you very much for your time today.
It's a pleasure.
One business group says Canada's retaliatory measures were almost as damaging as the U.S. tariffs themselves. Why the Canadian Federation of Independent Business is welcoming the government's decision, next. The head of Canada's largest private sector union is speaking out against the government's decision to roll back retaliatory tariffs on some U.S. goods. Unifor National President Lana Payne writes, Trump's attacks on auto, steel, aluminum and forestry sectors are hurting Canadian workers in real time. Walking back counter-tariffs isn't an olive branch. It only enables more U.S. aggression. Earlier today, Prime Minister Mark Carney used hockey to help justify his decision to do this now.
There is a time in a game, in a big game, and this is a big game, when you go hard in the corners, your elbows up. The time in a game where you drop the gloves in the first period and you send a message. And we've done that pretty uniquely in the world. We happen to have the best deal with the Americans right now, I'd note. But there's also a time in a game where you want the puck, you want a stick handle, you want to pass, you want to put the puck in the net. And we're moving later into the game, and we're at that time in the game.
For more reaction to this from the business community, we're joined by the CFIB's Executive Vice President for Advocacy, Corinne Pullman. Welcome to the show. Why do you welcome Prime Minister Carney's decision to scrap the counter-tariffs when others argue it diminishes Canada's leverage in trade negotiations?
So we're looking at it from the fact that for some of our members, this counter tariffs have really had a significant impact on their ability to be able to grow and compete. Our members, much like many Canadians, were very much in favor of retaliatory tariffs when this trade war started, because we were all angry about what was going on in the United States. But over this last several months, we've seen that support start to wane. We've been watching it on a regular basis as it goes down. I think we still have a good chunk of our members who are still very much in support of retaliatory tariffs, but many others now are sort of thinking a bit differently because now it's hurting. And in fact, we found that about 58% of our members said the retaliatory tariffs were having the biggest impact on their businesses. And so many of those, about 20%, were even saying that they couldn't sustain these extra expenses and costs for another 6 months. Now, steel and aluminum tariffs are also hurting to a great degree, and that's just about the same amount, 59%. So this is a somewhat of a reprieve, but it doesn't necessarily address all of the challenges that small businesses are facing. So for some, I'm hoping it'll be helpful to help them get through a really difficult time by removing some of those barriers that were making it challenging.
In the statement your organization released earlier, it said that Canada's counter-tariffs were almost as damaging as the American tariffs themselves. Can you put a number on that damage?
Well, like I said, 58% of our members were opposed.
And then a number on a dollar amount on how much it was costing them.
Well, we don't have exact numbers at this point. We are trying to collect that and get a better understanding, but it was in the thousands of dollars for each business on average. And so for some, it was really starting to become a pain point. And that might not seem a lot to some people who may have bigger companies or think that that's not that much, but thousands of dollars to businesses with very slim margins, and having that go on and on and on and not necessarily know when it was going to stop makes it really challenging to continue to be able to operate in the way that they knew how to operate. Many are trying to find ways to transition to other markets, to find new suppliers, and many have been able to do that. Others are still trying to make that transition, but it doesn't happen overnight. And in the meantime, costs are rising, demand is going down, and they're finding it more challenging to be able to compete.
So now that these counter tariffs have been lifted, what do you expect now to happen for independent businesses? How soon will they feel the impact? What do you expect next?
Well, and that's a question we're going to be monitoring over the course of the next several weeks. We want to sort of see, is this going to have a significant impact on those businesses that told us that this is hurting them? And how long is it going to take for that to be implemented and felt overall in the economy? I mean, this is also coming at a time when there's still a lot of uncertainty in other areas. And is this going to be the beginning of the start of something better? Or is this just sort of a transition point to maybe some more instability down the road? And I think that's what is the unknown part of all this. And so while we welcome this, we are also welcome it with some caution, because we also know there's still a lot more to be done. And we'd love for governments to still think about what they're going to do with all the money they have collected and make sure that they're providing that back to those industries that are being directly impacted, either before or going forward.
Perfect segue for my next question, which is, in terms of the money collected and in terms of supports for businesses, we've heard, especially for big businesses, about liquidity and loans. But for small businesses, what do they need from the government as they try and ride this out?
Liquidity, cash flow, same things that you're hearing. They're less keen on the loan part of the equation. Many of them are still dealing with debt from COVID and still trying to pay off that debt. So the idea of gaining more debt just to get through another crisis is not that appealing. So it's more about bringing some liquidity. And we believe things like potentially a bit of a rebate using the tariff money back to businesses that are being directly affected, much like the carbon tax rebate was done last December, or maybe it's a lowering the tax rate for even a temporary period of time, just to allow them to keep some of their earnings in their business and retain some of that, so they can use that to help their business either transition into new markets or be able to get through this difficult period.
I only have a minute left, but I know that I believe the CFIB put out a release either earlier this week or last week about the threat of how long some small businesses might be able to hang on while they're under this uncertainty and tariffs. Can you explain what's that based on and what the numbers are?
Yeah, so certainly. So earlier this week, we did put out a release because we asked our members about how much longer they can sustain the costs that are being imposed on their business before they're going to have to make some other decisions. It could be closing the business. It could be laying people off. It could be trying to figure out maybe they have to sell their business. I don't know what, but something that means that they just can't really necessarily go on in the ways that they have in the past. 20% said no more than 6 months, and almost 40%, about 38%, said no more than a year. So this is how we know that it's starting to bite into a degree, because they are feeling it. They've been trying hard to absorb these costs, but there's only so long you can do that. And it's hard for small companies to pass along these costs because they have to compete with large firms. And if they can't continue to compete and they don't have the deep pockets, it can become more challenging for them to pass that along. So that's basically why this was fairly important, because we're hoping that this will give some reprieve to at least some businesses, but we know others are still struggling.
I really appreciate your time today and giving us the small business perspective. Corinne Pullman is with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. I'm Karina Roman, in for David Cochrane. Thank you for watching Power and Politics. Hannah Mansing Tonight is next on CBC News Network.